Hi everyone. Um, I am Women's Grandmaster Sabina Foisor. You're watching Insane in the Endgames Tuesday night, evening, wherever you are. And let us get started. Going, what? No, please work. I did this. Oh, it's working. Okay. All right. Okay, perfect. I'm going to just make sure I'm just flipping the board a little bit. All right. So I thought for today's class, I'm going to be talking a little bit about a book that Grandmaster El Moradi Abadi and myself published. It's called Sherlock's Method. We wrote this book last year and it got published October. We're really excited about it. It has 3 different parts where we have like tactics, endgames, and complex decision making. And we wrote the book in a way to help people get trained, train for a tournament. And I thought for today's class, this is my start with the club with this particular theme of endgames. I thought I would share some of the positions that we have prepared in the book to kind of give you an idea of what we had. I thought I picked some of my favorite, like the first 3 of them are king and pawn endgames. I thought they go really well for today's class. And without further ado, let us get started. And so this was an endgame that happened in the game between Hikaru Nakamura and Bruzon Lazaro, 2 very strong chess players. And it's a king and pawn endgame. So king and pawn endgames are always, fun to teach and to study, I think, because you basically, you don't have so many pieces. The lines are pretty clear. You have to consider who's going to promote first, how you're going to take your opponent's pawns, create your pass pawns, and hope your pawn is going to be promoted before the opponent, basically. But okay, it's never easy, right? Because opposition is very important. Shouldering is also very important. Sometimes triangulation is a way to try to get to a position that is going to be good for you, and you're putting your opponent's king in Zugzwang. So there are a lot of very important themes that you have to know before you're able to solve king and pawn endgames, for example, with more pawns, right? Because you start with king and pawn versus king, and then you add more pawns, and anyways. So in this endgame, it is black to move, and you have to figure out what exactly it is that you want to do with black in order to win. Tempos, by the way, tempos are also very important in king and pawn endgames, especially with pawns on both sides of the board, because sometimes you want to make a pawn push, and you think it's going to be helpful for you, but sometimes it can be helpful for the opponent. So anyways, right now the kings are around this f5 pawn. Black, of course, wants to win that pawn, and white would love to have it traded so that they can bring in their king on the queen side, win these pawns, and win the endgame. So very simple. But it is black to move. So if you were to choose what to do here in this position with black, take your time a little bit and think which move you're going to play. You have a couple of choices. Let's think about it. Simple one, maybe. Well, I already see some people suggesting moves. C6, certainly. C6 is one move. B5 is one move. And then there's one more move that's important. Well, B5 actually right now, it really doesn't work so much. C6, and then there's one more, which is King G5. These 2 moves make lots of sense. Of course, G6 does not make any sense. As I said, if these 2 pawns get traded for white, it is very easy. Just bring in their king on this side of the board and they just win the endgame. So we definitely don't want that for black. Oftentimes you're told that in king and pawn endgames, if your king is in the center and you're more advanced, you should be winning. But it's not really just like that. Really, the way you have your pawns placed and how weak they are can matter too. Triangulation is, yeah. So a lot of people are suggesting c6. But actually, the correct move here is king g5. Let's just see what's happening after c6, because this happens to be a blunder. So you're thinking to play c6 because you want to make sure white does not have the opportunity to go king d5 probably. And you're considering you want to play b5, trading things here, possibly, right? Or, I don't know what other way, what other idea you can have. But if you do play this move c6, white is going to play king f4. And now black's advantage is gone. That would have been the only advantage, and we'll see it in a second where that is. And now you have to be careful with black not to be in Zugzwang, actually, because in some situations, think about it, if you don't have moves with your pawns on this side of the board, and then he's going to push you back, right? He can push your king back, then he will play f6. You'll be forced to trade the pawn, which is something we discussed briefly or really fast. Then he will trade, and then white's king will just march on the other side of the board, grab all your pawns, and you're going to be losing. So you definitely do not want to do that. Think about it that way. If you're not careful, for example, you play b5, right? That would be a huge blunder because white plays which move? Can anyone? Yes, it's a blunder. I already have it already. It's I'm sharing some of this stuff, like I said, from the book. You will find a lot of very interesting positions like this, and it's not just king and pawn endgames, it's plenty of endgames. For today's class, I chose king and pawn endgames because I find them a little bit easier and the ones that we should start with. Here, the correct move for white is c5. No, we are not going to take in b5, because if we do, pawn takes, then, you know, here, and now if we go king g5, king e5, and we don't quite have a way for black to improve. We just go back and forth, and this is going to be a draw. But c5 indeed, after b5, white is going to play c5. And the point is that now you're in Zugzwang. Your king has to go back. We've already discussed that g6 is not such a great move because white just enters, grabs these pawns, and wins the game. So we have to go back, and now the correct move for white to win in this position is king to g5. No, we will not go to e5, we will go to g5. King e5 would allow for the opposition, and you do not have a way to enter, and no more tempo moves. But you're going to go king to g5, and now no matter what we do with black, there's that specific idea that I've already mentioned, king g6, f6, trading the pawns, and white's king is on the same rank as your weaker pawn of the chain, and once that gets captured, you're losing with black. So it's kind of crazy from a position that you should be winning, which was basically the starting position, you will end up losing. Going back to c5, this is basically so that you know how the game finished. Black played king here, white played king e5, king d7, f6, g takes f6, king takes f6, and now white is winning because they reached, as I said, the rank of the pawn, and now there's that, you know, typical idea of approaching like a zigzag, I like to call it. So for example, if you go here, 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 go back, comes here, you defend, come here, right? So I did basically do some kind of a zigzag. Oops, it was the other way around. And now you have no place to move the king to keep the pawn protected, and you lose it, and that's it, done. This is the way the game ended. After king takes f6, white is winning, and it was the result of the game between Hikaru Nakamura and Lazaro Bruzon. Now, there was this interesting choice actually here after f6 for black to play g6. And the idea was that now white would play f7, king e7, promotion, king takes, And this probably, this is kind of interesting because now if you go king f6, g5 takes, now king g7, black could have been able to make a draw in this position because you do not actually have an entrance to reach this pawn. But in this position, white can try king d6, and then after g5, king takes c6, g4, king b7, for example, here, 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 queen, queen. Now this is a little bit unclear. Personally, I mean, I believe this should be a draw, but of course white is going to try to fight more for a win. But it's not as clear as the other position. Here, I believe there are lots of chances to try to make a draw. But given that this game was played in 2020 and was played online on chess.com, what to do? The game ended in a loss for black. Going back to the starting position, right? We did see c6 was not such a great idea. It was maybe a natural way of stopping what black thought to be white's threat, but in fact here he's actually winning with this beautiful move king g5. Maybe it's in a way counterintuitive as you fear this move, but really white cannot really do that because you know you just give up this pawn and then black just marches. Black's g pawn is much faster than anything here. If instead of king d5, white tries some move like this, it just loses to capture. And then if you go here, we go c4. And then say you just sit and wait here. Black can win by circling around. This is like one of my favorite ideas, I think, in king and pawn endgame. The fact that you can circle around with the king, and by doing so, you're shouldering and you're pushing the opponent's king down, and then you get to actually come back to grab the material. And this, if you ever play f6, will be a trade, and then black's king will go for these pawns and win the endgame. Like in this position, you play king e5, which is the move that makes the most sense. In this case, take a moment and think about this position if you have the time. If you're watching this video later, this is something you probably want to pause on and think about. The correct move for black to win here is c5. Going to king g4 will not help, actually, because there's f6. And here, sorry, this is the correct move. I apologize. c4 is a blunder because after the capture, you end up losing because now we take this pawn. But this is the correct move for black. And the idea is that now black manages to play b5, trade the pawn here. And now we just keep the opposition. This is kind of a beautiful idea, I think. Because black just sits now, wherever you go, we just keep the opposition, and you can never get to take advantage of the fact that you have an extra pawn. I think this is kind of gorgeous. King c5, very nice move. If you go, for example, king here, you have to be super careful because you can go from a winning, from a drawing position, basically, because that's a draw with king b7, to a losing position, because then I take, you go king b7, oopsie, whatever, b7 or c7, and then king b3, you take the pawn, I take the pawn, you go king c5, and you don't manage to get the king to c3. So now black is the one winning. You always have to be super, super cautious in king and pawn endgames because you never know when you can go from winning to losing to draw to anything. Just a simple move like this can, you think you're being sneaky, and in fact you end up losing. So king b7 is the move. But then, as I showed you, there's this beautiful, just opposition idea. Black just follows you around, and you can never try to go on the other side of the board, because b4 is never going to work, because I take en passant with black, And then my pawn in b3 is much more advanced than the a pawn. All right, so going back to that move c5, why is this move so strong? Well, because now after c5, you kind of have to sit and wait. If you go, for example, king e6 here, we go king f4, and white is in Zugzwang. White needs to give up this pawn, and you can give it up by playing king f7 or pushing. Pushing makes the most sense because you're keeping your king kind of close by to the b pawn and keeping the opposition. But unfortunately, this is not sufficient for you because look at this. And when you go king c6, black is much faster. So he gets to take both of those pawns and win the king. Take king c5, take here, and we've had this position before. And instead of king e6 in this position, if white plays king e4, the way we're winning is once again through circling around, king to g4, you have to come king e5, and now we're going king f3. Eventually you do have to push this pawn, and once you do, we are outflanking you. Basically, I think this is the way we call this circle. I like to call it circling around. Maybe you heard the term outflanking more often than my circling around. Whichever term you like is fine with me, as long as you know this idea of pushing the opponent's king back and getting to do whatever it is that you need to do. And that was that. This was the first endgame, and it's actually the first endgame in the chapter, in the part of endgames in our Sherlock's Method book. With that said, we have a lot of examples, but like I said, I'm just going to share some. I cannot share the whole book. Wouldn't be fair for those people, for the people who actually do buy the book, which I highly recommend you to do. I'm doing a little bit of promotion because, you know, I was allowed. I have asked for permission to do so. Let's go to the next position. And actually, this is kind of interesting because it seems like a very simple position, and it wasn't played by top players. It was played by some weaker players, but it doesn't matter because it doesn't matter which level you're playing something. If something is beautiful, I think you can create it at any possible level. You don't have to be a top GM to create beauty in chess. I think you can be at any level and beautiful positions can be created, and you just need to, I don't know, you just need to enjoy chess because it's a really nice game, I think. Anyways, let's get started with this position, and I'm curious to see your opinion. How do we evaluate this position? Because, well, we have pawns on the same side of the board. Both kings are pretty active. This is not from St. Louis. I'm actually in Romania. I'm recording this from Romania, and it is, guess what time? 4 a.m. here. All right, but let's talk about the position, and I'm really curious to know, what do you guys think? Who should be winning, or is it a draw? What is happening in this position? I see some g4, g5 ideas. King e5, king f6. Interesting. Very interesting. King e7, king f6 is also a possibility, right? Because when you go to e7, you're actually going to take the pawn. Yeah, for sure. You know, this position is so tempting to believe that white should be winning, I think. When you first see it, you are tempted to believe that white should be winning. I feel like that's how you're thinking in this position. It is white to move. I usually try to show a position from the side whose turn it is, so that it makes it easier for everyone to choose what it is that you want to play. It is a draw, but guess what? There's only one move. There's only one move that makes draw for white, which is kind of crazy because, as I said, the kings are advanced the same way towards the other side's pawns, and you may think it's super easy to make a draw, but really it's not. Moves that make most sense, of course, are what some of you have already suggested: king e7, king e5, g4. I don't know if I've seen any f pawn pushes, but you could consider f pawn push as well. Why not? I think that's about it. And so black is not in time. Okay, let's see. So we'll start with the blunders first to understand what the problem is in the position. I think the most natural move, and the one that was actually played by white in this position, is king e7. And it's really a natural move. Unfortunately, it is a blunder. And white ended up losing after playing here, because now you want to take the pawn, right? So obviously black has to play f5. And then you realize that by the time you go take this pawn, right, to try to get all of those pawns, he will be much faster because your weakness is much closer to black's king than his weakness is to yours. And so if you play f4 to try to make your weakness a little bit further away, here, e3, king f6, king f3, king g7, takes, and now, take a moment and think which pawn black is going to capture. I hope you're capturing the correct one. And that correct pawn is actually the pawn in h3. That is the one you should capture. That is what happened in the game, and black ended up winning. We are capturing the one that white is going to create as a passed pawn. That's very important. You always want to take the pawn of the opponent that is bothering you, or could bother you in a way. Here, if you take this one, king takes g6. Actually, in that position, white resigned, but after king takes g6, obviously king g4, and you grab that pawn and you win the endgame. Clearly not taking this one because this is giving white the opportunity to save themselves now because they can promote the h-pawn too, right? So this is what's happening. Clearly, the pawns are of the same rank. Black promotes first, but they don't have the opportunity. Their king is not close enough to actually win here, keep white's king on the edge and have a checkmating idea. So this is going to be a draw. Okay. Everything was pretty much forced after king e7, and like it makes total sense for black to push. If we try to go king f6 in this position, black will play king e2, still going for this pawn, and if you go king g7, obviously we take, and then that f pawn just marches. If you push now, we're basically going back to the previous line, and there's no way for white to do much. If g4, we can just either take here or take in f4. Then we take here, and one of these two pawns will be winning. So that was what happened in the game. King e5 falls for something very similar. King e2, back in the pawn. And now, if you try to just keep the king closer, it's not going to help you much. King takes f2. If you go g4, black will keep attacking you, and it's not like you're actually able to do much here. Whichever pawn you push, black will have the extra pawn with which they will win. So the correct move, as some of you have pointed out already, is g4. But this is the only move that works. The reason this is the only move that works is you are keeping your weakness. So this will be weakness that black will try to go all the way there to take, right? Really far away. So by the time this king goes there, it will take a long time. So you will actually have the time to save yourself. So now king e2, of course, and now f4. This is an important move. King f3. And maybe now I can give you 1 minute to think about what you're going to do next with white. What was the reason of all this? And the reason is why not king e? We'll see king e4 as well. We will look at king e4 as well. f5 indeed. Not king e5. This would be a blunder for white if you play king e5 because you are wasting time. King g3, you're wasting time. And now if you go king f6, he can take either one of these pawns and black is still winning because once again we're dealing with a kind of far away passed pawn. So not king e5 but f5. So white manages to trade this pawn. G takes f5. King g3 would allow for this beautiful move, after which white is winning, most likely, I think. Because now if you take, we go g5 first. Very important, because we're making black play 2 moves before starting to push the h5 pawn, the h pawn, right? We don't go king e7. This is very important. Every single tempo matters. I chose these positions because I felt it would really show how important king and pawn endgames are and how simple you think they can be, but no, there are nuances that you have to consider each step of the way. And now if that happens, h5, that's the move for black. First h5, if you takes, here, king somewhere, and then king g2. And yeah, you get to promote first, and I don't get to promote. But for those of you who are familiar with this is a draw because white's king is not advanced enough in order to create that mating idea, and this is the h pawn, so this is a draw. So h5, very important move, and if you try to play g5, h4, you take, we can try to get into this position, but this also should be a draw. You do have the queen and you do have an extra pawn, but this most likely will end in a draw. After f6, h5, that's an option. That's not, maybe that draws as well here. h5. Yeah, I think this draws too, because we're probably getting into a similar position. Takes, king e7, takes, h4, and yeah, this leads to the same kind of idea as before. Queen here, draw. Because if white's king would have been in g5, white would be winning. In order to be able to win these h or a pawns, the king has to be 2 squares away from g3. Because that's how you put the king on the back rank, and then you have the mating idea even when black promotes. Hopefully everyone is familiar with that. Okay, so f5, and black has to play g takes f5, pawn takes f5, and now very important, I guess it doesn't matter, king f4, both king f4 and king e4 work. King f4, and now only one move draws. Once again, we're getting into a position where only one move draws for white. And you have 2 of them. 1, f6, 2, king e7. I'm curious which one you guys are choosing to play here. Which one of them? One wins, the other one loses. I hope you're choosing the right one. And the right one is king e7. You need to get that pawn in order to make a draw. You're getting the f pawn. With the h pawn, black will not be able to win. Good, very nice. I like your guys. I like the way you guys think. f6 is a blunder. f6 is a blunder. Don't worry, we'll see it in a second. Here, and black cannot win this because, for example, if you play h5, what does white do? White needs to get the opposition, right? The shouldering. So whenever black gets to win the h pawn, white needs to make it to take the opposition. So you don't care about going king g7. You don't care about playing h4. The more you push the pawn forward, the easier you make it for the other side to win because they take your pawn really fast, move the king away from in front of the pawn, and then they promote. So you do not want to do that. You're going to play the correct move, which is king e7, because what you need to do is, like I said, you're trying to come around like this and take the opposition when time happens. So here, here, king f4, king d5, king g3, king e4, takes, king f3, draw. Okay, so it's not important to go try to get the pawn because you'll never get it. You circle around, okay? This is a big theme that is my emphasis for today's class. Hopefully it was pretty clear so far. Going back to that f6 point, right? So I said king e7 was the correct choice, and there's no way for black to try to win here. Clearly they have to take the f5 pawn and then go for the h3 pawn, but you saw white makes it in time. f6 would have been a blunder. Exactly, you don't push the pawns unless you're sure of things. You should calculate anyways. Here, king g6. These are mind squares. One of my favorite king and pawn endgame themes, besides the circling around, which I keep making, and I keep making this, I don't know why. But mind squares are amazing because if you're not careful, you lose. I mean, whoever gets on the mind square first loses, clearly. Now you cannot move the king anywhere. You need to stay there to keep your f6 pawn protected, so you have to play h4. And now black plays the move h5, putting you in Zugzwang. There's nothing you can do now. You need to move the king. Black takes the f6 pawn, after which they win the game. Obviously, it would be terrible, super terrible for black to play h6, because now it would be white who puts them in Zugzwang by pushing h5 check. You need to move the king, most likely take, and after that, we go there, we promote, and white is winning. So h5. Correct move, Zugzwang. Need to move the king, we take the pawn, and we win. So that was that. Going back to the starting position, it's kind of crazy, but g4 was the correct move for white to actually keep the position balanced and just make a draw. Some of you were asking me previously, why king e2, why not king e4? There's no big difference between the two, just that, of course, with king e2, we allow f4. With this move, we do not allow f4, but with king e2, we did have a threat to actually capture the pawn, and white was pushing it. This way, we are actually not having any threat. We need two moves to go grab the pawn, so white has the time to go attack this pawn as well. Okay, so we're now king e7, and then and you have to play f5. You don't have time to go king f3 because white will be faster. So it would be a blunder here, here, and then if you take, we go king g7, king g3, for example, and now g5. And we're dealing with the same thing as before. And if king h4, king h6, Zugzwang once again. The king needs to move, and we take here, and white is winning. So in this position, after king e7, f5 is the correct move. And now for white, king f6, keeping the attack on the pawn. If you take, h5 will not do anything, because obviously we can take, king here, draw. And if you play f4, well, I think we have multiple ways for white to make a draw, but this is probably the most straightforward one. Keeping the pawn under attack, king f3, h4. If you play h6, we can grab either one of the pawns, and this is going to be a draw. And that was this endgame. So like I said, you don't always, and even if you see a position, and don't necessarily look for positions that are played by top level players. If you see an interesting position, try to see, try to understand it, try to just take the beauty of it, and you never know what nice material you can find in everyone's game. Awesome. Going on to our next endgame. This is the next endgame, and this was played between two grandmasters, of course, Ashwin Jayaram against Conrad Holt. Another very interesting king and pawn endgame. You can clearly see white's pawn structure is so much better, right? So they should have a better endgame, but you still have to consider how you're going to try to improve in this position with white. Things are not so easy, right? I like this position because it's a little bit, maybe not counterintuitive, but it's not an idea that you often consider. You're always told that it is so important to bring the king to the center, and there's always the right way, but really there's never a right way. The right way is the one that actually helps you win. There's nothing, you know. The right way is only the one that makes you win, or else it's not the right way, it's just some way. So you need to understand what it is that you want to do, and then find the fastest way to get there. Okay? Chess king. First get the king out. Okay? Or f4, king f2. You see, that's the natural approach. That's the natural approach that everyone is considering, to bring in the king by king f1 or pushing f4, but no, the correct move in this position would have been king to h2, would have been the winning move. And we'll talk about it, why it is a winning move, and that's also something, of course, that we discuss in the book very much. But in the game, Ashwin Jayaram played king f1, and it could have led to a draw. Things went a little bit differently, but if you do get the book, there will be a little bit more explanation than this part as to why, you know. And Elshan, Grandmaster Elshan Moradiabadi, came up with this very nice description here as to what is happening here. But king e7, king e2, king d6. Ben Feingold says always to move the king out. Yeah, he does. I mean, everyone will tell you that is the most important thing to do. But anyways, let's see. So king here, and now king d3, king d5, right? So black is the one who actually manages to get the king in the center first, because they're a little bit faster. And had you played f4, it would have been the same thing. A3 or a4. Those are your two options here with white. A3, for example, e5. And in this position, black blundered. Black played g5 in this position. Oops, sorry. After f3. In this position, black played g5, which was a big blunder. You know, when you're playing king and pawn endgames and pawns are not blockaded and you have them on both sides of the board, you should be very mindful on how you're pushing your pawns forward, because usually you need those extra tempi. You need the time to know when to give the move to the opponent. If you're getting rid of two moves, right? Because g5 gets rid of two choices, g6 and g5, right? There are two. You need to make sure that's okay, right? And in this case, black played it a little bit too fast, and now white could have played a4, and white is winning here because now you need to find a way to lose moves. For example, like, I don't know. If you play b5, for example, to try to say, oh, I have b6 here. Sure, but look how many moves I have. I have b3, I have b4, I have g3, I have g4. So many moves for white. Here, and then you push your h pawn, and then h4. And then at some point, you will let my king enter. If you go that way, for example, you let my king enter, and white is way faster than anything, and white is winning. You also have the entrance there. So after f3, g5, white did not play a4. White played b3. Mistake. Now b5, taking you know, getting this extra move for themselves. White waited here a little bit, thinking that we'll give the move without actually pushing a pawn. H5, G3, and here black actually made a final mistake, after which they ended up losing. They played H4. The correct move to draw, and this is a beautiful idea, I think, because you need to understand how you blockade the position so that white does not have extra tempes to actually push your king back and go forward. So the correct move for black in this position would have been b4. The point is that now if you take, we go b5, so we have blockaded these pawns, and not just that, we basically have created a fortress. There's no entrance for white's king. There's no entrance. And if you play h4, we take, and then king d6, and you go king e4, and we go king e6, and you don't have an entrance. If you play f4, we trade, right? And we maintain the opposition, and white does not have a way to enter. Despite the extra pawn, there's no win. This is going to be a draw. So this would have been a really beautiful idea. You don't have any other entrances. This simply gets to blockade the position and draw. And instead of capturing here, if you're thinking with white that this is a wiser decision, it's not going to help do anything, because black can just go back. And if you go king here, they will still play h4, take or g4 to say, oh, I'm giving the move. Okay, but now black has this extra move. And I have to go back, and he's going to go king d6. And you do not have an entrance. You go here, we take the opposition. This is very important. We take the opposition here, we take the opposition here. Here. And this is a draw. Don't make the blunder in this position when white plays king e3. Don't make the blunder of playing king d5, okay? Because you are thinking that this is the only important square. Whenever white goes to e4, you should go to e6. Wrong. Because the position is not completely blockaded here like it was in the previous line that I showed. And now if white goes king d3, white actually has the opportunity to enter this way and grab your pawn. So that would be a huge blunder. Please be very mindful and do not make that blunder. Yes, it's a pretty double pawn sacrifice. I think it's really nice. So instead of g5 in that position, black should have played b5. And the point is that, you know, with this move, they're keeping this extra tempo. Anyways, that was a move was supposed to be played, right? Because that pawn had to be moved forward. And then we get this b6 extra tempo move, and we're maintaining the option to play either g6 or g5, depending on white is playing too. Tempos are very important once again in king and pawn endgames, where there are pawns on both sides of the board, and it's not so clear. They're not blockaded yet, and there are potential entrances for both sides. I'm not sure if black thought, even at a little bit, that they had some chances to win. I don't think they should have, but in case they did, it was unfortunately wrong. So b5, and then b3, for example, now g5, because we're maintaining that extra tempo. g3, now this beautiful idea once again, b5, and then you go king here, h5, any g4 or h4, those can get traded, and as I showed you previously, black manages to keep the opposition and draw the game. So once again, this is what happened. The game, once again, I'll repeat how it went. So king f1, here. White brought the king, so did black. And unfortunately for black in this position, after f3, they went for g5, okay? And then b3 was played, so white missed the first time the chance to win, but black messed up once again, not with b5, but with actually they did play b5, but here, after g3, they blundered, played h4, and after takes, this is how the game went. And this was played in St. Louis, actually. White was able to enter. It wouldn't have mattered if black would have played b6 here to give the tempo back, because we do have b4. And this idea to play b4 also wouldn't have helped, and playing, for example, b5 here to give the move, because now, compared to before, we actually are on the rank of the pawn. So here, white is able to take the pawn and win the game. Lots of blunders indeed. I mean, this happens sometimes. What to do? I mean, it's life. It's not such an easy endgame, and when you have a lot of pawn pushes, it is very easy to make blunders. Even strong grandmasters make them, as you can see here. We all make mistakes. Who is behind me? OMG, who is behind me? We're not an April Fools anymore. We are, I think it's April 6th now. So you guys cannot trick me with that. with that. Although I did look. Anyways, going back to the starting position. So King F1 could have allowed to that beautiful draw where black was giving up that pawn and then blockading the position with b5. But let's see the winning idea, which would have been really, really nice. And I've seen this happening in other top players' games. I don't know if you guys did see it or not, but if you didn't, you can see it now. King h2. So let's see. King f7, obviously. You can try king e7 too if you want, but there's no big difference here, 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 here. So we're still getting the same thing. But now we have this a4. So we're making black out of moves. And if you try to activate your king, h4. This never works because it allows white the opportunity to bring in the king. So you have to try to keep the position as solid as you can and just wait. But white can simply advance here, look. This is a line that we actually gave in the book. And since you're just sitting and waiting because you cannot move the king away from there, it allows white to enter. Now white plays here, f3. Oops, not f4, sorry, f3. Although f4 I think works too. King here, now f4. You need to move the king back, and white advances with their king. And now the move that wins the game, g5. And here, say you go back, white has plenty of extra moves on this side of the board to make your king go away, and then their king is going to be here, for example, b4. If you go king f7, we enter from this side of the board. If you go king d7, we can take and enter from this other side of the board. And white is winning. So going back to that position after king here, if black tries to come on this side of the board and keep you restricted, for example, e5, and tries to kind of keep the position solid, the correct move is always going to be for white this a4 move, because with this move, white indeed does lose 2 tempes, but in the same time stops black's pawns on the queen side, which allows white to have plenty of extra tempes, something that black will not have. And then if he tries some h5, he's going to lose to king f3. Just sit and wait, supposedly, right, to take the opposition. And now you will run out of moves. Look, you don't have pawn pushes anymore. This b5 will never work because we just take, and here we have plenty of moves with white, like f3, f4, pretty much anything. Waiting, and g4. You have to sit and wait. And the correct move for white to win is here, and we have plenty of extra tempes, as I said, but we can play f4. And we're only going to utilize our extra tempi when we have the entrance over here to this pawn. So now we can play b4, and your last try is b5 in case I take to play b6 and hope that you will just take the opposition. But obviously I will not take, I'll play a5. You don't have this pawn push anymore. You need to move the king, and white is going to be able to activate the king, win the h-pawn, and win the game. If black does not try to push the pawns forward and goes for king f6, white can simply gain space on the side of the board until you're running out of pawn pushes. And let's not forget, he will always have these extra moves to give you the tempo. So you can sit and wait. This is the line that we actually suggested. King f6, king e4, king e6. So far, so good. We've gotten into this position before. Black has to try to control these two squares so that white cannot push you back. But now f3, and eventually you have to start pushing these pawns. And after that, there's just h5. And if you play here, at some point you need to let me enter on one of these two sides, and white is going to be winning. So these were the king and pawn endgames that I found, the most interesting, and I felt that it's important to kind of share with you so that you understand how easily you can blunder in king and pawn endgames, how important shouldering opposition is, but also tempes, like how you keep your extra tempes with the pawn, how you don't always go towards the center by the normal way through f1 or push the f-pawn and bring the king. Sometimes through h2 is actually working better, as you could see. This way for white, why was it better basically to go through h2? Because if he didn't come that, and you're also making it a little bit like on a better square, f4 was a better square than d3, which is only as far as white could get normally through f1. But here you're a little bit more advanced, and you saw how by moving your pawns the right way, white does have plenty more extra tempes and can push black's king back, and white can go forward. So this is something very important. Now I did start the class a little bit late today, so I'm going to give you an extra position, and this is like another very beautiful and favorite position of mine. It's not a king and pawn endgame, it's actually bishop versus pawns, and I find it really beautiful. It was played between Gawain Jones and Dinara Saduakassova. I love this position from the book. I wanted to make sure I included it, and it seems simple at first, but it's really a little bit more complicated than that, I believe. Let's get to it. So in this position, clearly white seems to be doing really well with the extra piece, but black's king is close to actually winning these two pawns. Like clearly those two pawns will be lost because they're on dark square, and because of that, we still have the f-pawn, and you may think with the bishop and the f-pawn you should be able to win, but let's not forget that black does have 3 pawns that you have to stop, and it's not going to be easy, and you need the help of your king to actually support the f-pawn, which will stay passed. And in some situations, like, there are lots of drawing ideas. A few moves back, when you read the book, you'll find out about some mistakes that were happening, that happened before, but here it may seem like, oh, it's just, you just want to go f4, and you think you are totally fine, but no, because black's king is actually in the box at this point, and after I take, I'm actually in the box, and surprisingly or not, you're actually not able to win this, because black's connected passed pawns are going to keep your king passive. And with their king, they stop your f-pawn, and it's actually going to be a draw. You cannot win this. You guys can check it, I promise. There's no win. The king just goes there, pushes a5. Like, for example, like, you cannot push it. Like, even if you push it like that, right? The king comes to stop the pawn, and even if you bring in your king, you have to be super cautious. He's going to try this and this. he will just keep the pawns in such a way that you will not be able to win them. And of course, I'm also threatening c4. So you need to move the bishop and then a5. And you will not be able to use the king to bring in the king to support your f-pawn because you have to stay here in case black starts pushing the pawns to give up the bishop and make a draw. So the correct move in this position is, I didn't see anyone actually, oh no, someone did say it. Bishop d5, indeed, someone did say it. It is bishop d5. So you're taking advantage of a small tactical idea to try to get your bishop on a better placed square. Bishop d5, okay. Starting point of this. If you take, you're going to lose, very simple. So we're not going to consider that. This is a passed pawn. Nobody's winning. I know, it seems very simple, but wait, it's not over. That's what you think, but it's not over. King takes b4. Now bishop takes c6. King takes c5, right? So trust me, if it would be that easy, I mean, it seems like it's easy because white managed to take that pawn. Right now, they're just 2 pawns. They have the f3 pawn, and should be very simple win, you may think. This is very suspicious. This is very suspicious indeed, because there are not so many moves that win this. There are not so many moves that win this. In the game, white played bishop e4, okay? And let's see what happens so that you understand why there's only one move that wins for white. Bishop e4. And this is a blunder because now king d4. All right? You cannot push the f pawn. So bishop c6, king e3, bring in the king, bishop c6 so that you're keeping the pawn under attack. So you could try to win it if I push a5. But I can still push a5. You cannot take it because you lose that one. So you are bringing in your king. And black plays a4, okay? Black plays a4. You can never take this pawn. So you're going to go king b4, and guess what? King f4. You cannot take this pawn because if you do, we'll push, right? And then you have to stop the pawn with the bishop. We'll sacrifice, take this, draw. So what will you do? Just sit. And I just sit and wait. Back and forth, back and forth. Kind of funny, or not. It's funny that black manages to make a draw. It's not so funny for white, who was hoping to win because they do have an extra bishop, right? So this is a fortress. Incredible. When I saw this, I was looking so many times. We tried to use the engine and everything to make sure we're not mistaken. But this is a fortress. There's no way for white to win. As if you're moving the king to try to approach, the a pawn will go. So you don't manage to protect your pawn with the king and then with the bishop to stop those pawns. And you don't manage to do that. So there's no progress here. And the game ended in a draw after a couple more moves of repetition. Takes, and the players agreed on a draw. But guess what? In this position, actually, black is not drawing. White has a move with which they can win. And that move is bishop b7. Let's see why. You have to play a5. If you go king to b6, we'll go bishop c8. Obviously, the bishop is attacked. We need to move it. A5, f4. Push the pawns. King's coming. Pawn push. Pawn push. You have to stop it. And now bishop g4, bishop h3, something like that. The point is that now it is white that creates some kind of a fortress. Black's king is in Zugzwang, right? You cannot actually approach the pawn. So what we're going to do with white, we're going to win those pawns, okay? And then we're bringing in the king to support our pawn and win the game. So if you play here, we go here. And no matter what you do now, you know, it's game over. You push a2, we take it, b3, we take it. So this is kind of the cool idea. If in this position, after king c2, you go king c7 earlier, we move the bishop, obviously. But here we can create this fortress again. So we're creating it like this. And so the king cannot suddenly make it to e4. If it could, obviously, it would be a draw. But king cannot really make it in such a way to attack this pawn, and white will be able to support it with the king. And if white manages to support this f-pawn with the king and stop those 2 pawns with the bishop, white is clearly winning because they have an extra bishop. Yeah. And instead of king d6, if you play a4, for example, here, we bring in the king. And whichever pawn you push, you can't survive for, like b3, for example. You're not doing anything. You're not doing anything with this pawn, because if you push b2, the bishop goes there, right? So we can even go here and try to grab those pawns. First, the bishop will stop it, defend this one, win those pawns, and then win the game. Another idea would be to maybe go king to d4 to try to go grab, or not grab the pawn because you cannot, but just attack the pawn like this and then push those pawns in such a way that you will make him, you'll keep him passive. But no, this doesn't work because I can even take. No, it's very simple. I just take that pawn and then I'm winning the game. So, bishop to b7, a5, king b2. Yeah, white is winning. White is winning in this position. a4. In the game, the players drew as I showed previously in the first place. And now, here's the thing. The correct move here for white is king to a3. The point is now black's king needs to move away. So our king can go forward. And the pawn and the bishop together will be able to create this fortress so the black's king cannot approach the pawn. If black's king is close to the pawn, we can always give up one of our pawns on the other side, deflect the bishop, take the pawn, right? Or be able to play king e3, king f4 like it was previously as the players agreed on a draw. But in this case, we're putting black in Zugzwang. If you go king b6, we'll just move the bishop back. You go back, we push f4. And you cannot really come close enough to attack either one of these. And then you cannot push these pawns because the other one will be lost. If you go king d4 to try to play king e3, once again, very important, f4. And as you can see, there's this fortress that stops black's king from approaching the pawn, which means that now white is going to be able to, or this is what they want, king here, try to take that pawn and win. So you kind of have to go back. And here we put black in Zugzwang. We don't rush to push this pawn forward. If you do, that's what's going to happen. And now we go here, he goes here. And as previously, the king staying next to the pawn, you can never take this one because the a pawn will go. And it's going to be a draw. Sorry. So the correct move here is bishop back, just giving them the move. I love how bishops give the move just like that. You just move it far away, kind of like the rook. Just kind of like you learn when you're first learning to play chess, you learn how to make king, rook versus king. Here, you know, you learn that the bishop can make a waiting move, something that a knight cannot do. They're trying to get in front of the pawn. King b4, going in front of the pawn. Nope, 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 nope. Fortress again. Now you will have to maybe push those pawns or sit here. And now, obviously, don't take, please, don't make this blunder, because after this, it will obviously be the draw. Here, 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 takes the pawn. So now what do? Waiting move, waiting move. You sit and wait, and guess what? Obviously, we can still not take, because if we take, we're not in the box of this pawn anymore, which is this one, of course. and then they always push it forward, deflect our bishop, go for this f pawn. So no, we don't do that. We go king c5. He sits and waits. That's why it was important for the king to be next to the pawn, because that way you didn't have time to do anything. But in this case, you can do things. And now look how beautiful. King here. You start pushing the pawn. Whichever pawn you push, a3 or b3, we go bishop d5. So now we switch the position of the bishop. The king comes. We're going to win the bishop stops those two pawns, and we're going to win it as a king and pawn endgame. And in the end, of course, once you get that drawing position, you just make a bishop move, give the move, win the king and pawn endgame. If you play b3, now the correct move for white here is king to c3, and then sits and waits, because you cannot push the pawns anymore. The king cannot approach this f pawn. Now we go this way, and you see how great it is to have the bishop on the correct diagonal. It stops the pawn from promoting, it keeps our pawn to go forward, and it also creates this fortress that does not allow black's king to approach the pawn. Kind of crazy, but I really hope you guys like this one. I remember the first time I saw it, I definitely talked to Elshan. I wanted to make sure this gets be in the book, because it's definitely like a study, and you only have one solution that helps you. It seems simple, but it's not as simple. You see, if it would have been that simple, we wouldn't have spent about 20 minutes going through it. So these were some of the positions that I wanted to share with you guys today from our book. Once again, the book's name is Sherlock's Method. It was co-authored by Grandmaster Elshan Moradi-Abadi and myself. It's a book that's supposed to help you get to train for a tournament. It has different parts. This is one of the parts, and I shared some of the positions with you. There are many more interesting ones, and not just king and pawn or study-like. There are rook endgames as well, and queen endgames and others, and complex endgames or multiple piece endgames. If you guys want to purchase it, check out St. Louis Chess Club's, the club. I don't know. I really, really, really hope that you enjoyed this insane endgame video. I cannot wait for future videos here on the YouTube channel of St. Louis Chess Club. I hope to see you guys on Twitch as well as on YouTube next time. And check out the book. With that said, I wish you all a beautiful evening or morning, wherever you are, and I'll see you in my next video. Stay tuned for other videos from the St. Louis Chess Club. Make sure to subscribe so that you get notified whenever the club is posting new videos. Tons of material coming up each day, lots of stuff to learn, and hope to see you guys soon. Bye for now.